All right, in this video, we're going to look at this application that allows users to register for an account. Let's take a look. We have an email field here where the user can type their email address in. I'll put my address in there. I can put my mobile phone number in there. We'll go with that. And I can select the country that I'm in. Actually, I'm not going to do that right away. I want to pick email here, and I'm not going to accept the register button. I'm going to click register, and you can see what happens here. I got please select a country because I hadn't selected a country, and I have a message that says this box must be checked, and they're both in red. Let me hit my reset, and you can see when we started out, I had these little red asterisks indicating that these were mandatory fields. It doesn't say that, but I think enough people use forms now that they know that that means it's a mandatory field. So we can fill this out. We can click a button, or we can reset it, which you saw me do. I reset it, and the cursor automatically went back to the email field. And if we do fill it out, country USA, we get this little thank you for registering with us message, and we should get a confirmation shortly. Now let's go look at the code that creates this form. So we'll start out with the index.html file. Standard HTML file we've been using all along. We have an H1 that tells us to register for our account right up here. And then we have our form. The action for this form is confirm.html. So this looks like a form that's sending something to a server, but in reality, it's going to call this confirm.html document, which is right here. And we can look at it. And that's that confirmation we saw that says, thanks for registering with us. It's just a little form that pops up after we hit the submit button. So let's go back here. So that's what this form is going to do. We don't have a server set up for us to actually process any of this stuff. So that's a nice way to give a little confirmation. And the data actually didn't get sent anywhere. Well, technically it got sent to confirm.html, but we didn't do anything with it. So we have a label for our email, and then a text box. And then right after it, we have a span with the asterisk in the field. And the same thing, we have a text box for our mobile phone number with a span right next to it. Then we have a select box that we looked at earlier in an earlier video that lets us pick our country. And then right after it, we have the span with the asterisk. Those are marking those different controls as being mandatory. We have to do those. They're required. And we're going to see in a little bit that these little spans that follow each of the controls come in very handy for us. We have another div with some radio buttons. They're all set to a name of contact, but they each have a different value. This one's text, this one's email, and this is none. If they say they don't contact me, it'll get a value of none. And then we have our terms of service checkbox. Value set to yes. It's required that we do that. It's got the span tag next to it with the asterisk again. And then notice down here we have two buttons, and neither one of these are technically a submit button, which is not that uncommon. We don't always want our buttons to be submit. In this case, this is just a regular old button that with a value of register. We're going to attach an event to it, and our event then might call the submit on the form. Rather than actually have a button that immediately submits the form. We do this if we want to do some kind of validation and checking before our form gets submitted. And we have a reset button. And each one of these are going to have some kind of click event attached to them. So that is our form. That's our form. So let's go look real quickly. Let's look at our CSS. There's one thing I want to point out in here. So our body, H1s, divs, they all have some formatting labels. Down here we have span. All spans on this page are set to the color red. which is why those asterisks appear as red on our form, because anything that's inside a span tag is set to color red. And that will include our error messages when we get that far. All right, so let's look at the real magic, and that is in the JavaScript file. Okay, we have use strict. We have a dollar function set up at the beginning, like we almost always do. And then we have this function that's going to run to process the entries. We have a function here for resetting the form that we'll look at in a minute. And then down here, we add the event listeners. Once the DOM content has been loaded, we'll call the add event listener for process entries to our register button. We'll have the reset button set to its click event. So if somebody clicks the reset form button, and then we're using the dollar function to get the email address item and set the focus to that. So that our form always starts out in that top email address box once it's loaded. And we can see that when I hit refresh, it immediately has focus up here and the cursor's in it. All right, so let's look at the actual event handlers. So here's the process entries event handler. It's going to go out and get each of the controls, the email address, the phone, the country, and the terms. It's going to get a reference to all those: email, phone, country, and terms. Now we're going to do some checking of the inputs. We're going to make sure the entries are valid on all our different controls. So we're going to assume from the beginning that it is valid, that everything they did is correct. And if we find something that's wrong, we're probably going to set that to false. I know we're going to set that to false. Okay. So first thing we do, check, did they type in an email? If they typed in an email, or if they did not type in an email, meaning it's still empty, we're going to do email dot next element sibling. Now, what's the next element sibling? If you think about the document object model of this HTML file. Okay. Let's go back over here and look at it for the email box. Inside this div, which is the parent, we have three different elements. One of them is the text box. Its next element sibling, the meaning I kind of just like to think, well, the thing right next to it, right? Is that span tag, okay, that has the asterisk in it. Okay, so that is the next element sibling for this input. And that's going to be true of all of these inputs. This input, its next element sibling is that span tag. So after every single control, we have a span tag, which would be considered the next element sibling for all those things. So that's where that next element sibling that we talked about several videos ago is going to come in very handy in this case. So we're going to take that next element sibling and change its text content from the asterisk to this field is required, because they didn't type anything in there. And then we're going to set is valid to false. Okay, so now as we're doing our checking here, our page isn't going to get submitted because something's not right with the user input. All right, if they did type something in email, we're going to do the else, and that sets next element siblings text content to an empty string, which is going to get rid of the asterisk. So it'll just kind of disappear. So if they typed it incorrectly, it gets set to an empty string. If they typed it incorrectly, the asterisk gets changed to the error message. Then we're going to do the same thing for phone. If the phone's empty, they didn't type a phone, we're going to set that phone control, the next element sibling .text content, to this error message. If there was nothing wrong with the phone control, we're going to get rid of the asterisk, meaning they've typed something in there. Okay. And then the same thing on country. If they hadn't selected a country, and in this case, if the text content is blank, we're going to set the text content back to that. Please select the country. for the error message. So all those little asterisks become holders, those little spans become holders for our error messages as we're doing our input validation. And then we're going to do the same thing for the radio button for the checkbox. Go back here, we're going to check to make sure this has been checked, that they agree to the terms of service. And the same kind of thing, next element sibling, we're going to set the error message, or we're going to get rid of the asterisk. Okay. And then if is valid, so is valid start at true. If this one passed, and this one passed, and this one passed, and this one passed, that means the form is still valid. If any of them failed, the form got set to false, or the is valid got set to false. Okay. But if it's still valid, then we're going to go out and we're going to get a reference to the form, and we're going to call the submit method on the form. So that's the input processing for all the entries on our form, making use of that next element sibling text content to either get rid of the asterisk or to give an error message. Okay. If is valid was false, this will not run. And what's going to happen? It's not going to do anything. It's just going to go by, it's going to set those error messages, and the form's not going to go anywhere. It gives the user a chance to fix their errors. We have a reset form down here that calls the form's reset method, okay, which resets all the things on the form to their default values. That's going to set it back to the original asterisk that we talked. It's going to set all the controls back to blank. But then we're going to go through and we're going to get that email address and set its next element sibling text content back to the asterisk. And we're going to do that for the phone, the country, and the terms. We're going to put all those asterisks back. So this blanks out the actual contents of the form. This sets all the mandatory fields up, and we set focus back to email address so the user can start typing in the form again. And that's it. That's how this application works.